You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. Tonight in this crew, we got myself, we got the Headless Giant, we got Jin the Ninja, and we got the true crime occultist BD Salerno back on with us. I'm very happy to have her on this episode. As you can tell in the title, we are talking about Cayce again. And, BD has actually had like some pretty decent experience with Edgar Cayce's, sorry, I forget the name of the place. But you have actually...
ARE.
Yes.
The ARE.
And and she is hugely into his stuff. So I figured to make it better, why not bring her on and have a part 2? And why not bring Jin the Ninja on just for shits and giggles anyway? No, but I always do like having his take on things, which is why I try to have like all 4 of us, my honest opinion, probably look at things a little bit differently, but we work real well together. Mm-hmm. So this should be a fun and exciting episode. And this time we're going to let BD kind of start off with this one since, Headless had the show for himself last time. BD, let everybody know, I guess, how you got into Edgar Cayce.
Well, I have to say that I'm probably here right now doing what I do right now indirectly because of Edgar Cayce. He has influenced the trajectory of my life since young adulthood. And everything I learned started at the Edgar Cayce Foundation, which is also called the Association for Research and Enlightenment. It's in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I have a real interesting background with how that happened. It was part serendipity, part synchronicity, and part fate that brought me there. But at that time, it was several years ago, I was always interested in metaphysics, but I didn't have a direction with it, and I wanted to learn more. I was taking a lot of psychic development classes. I knew a bunch of psychics at the time, and I was training in various things and psychometry, trance mediumship. It was really interesting. And they took a special interest in me, and one of them, who I was good friends with, gave me my first tarot card reading. I'd never even seen a deck of tarot cards. And she pulled out a deck and she's flipping cards. She said, "Oh, God, you can do this too." And I was like, "What do you mean?" "You are a natural born astrologer. You should study this because you can do that and you can read these cards too." And that pushed me into the direction that I had been looking for, because I was kind of in between jobs and in between life status and had no direction. I just knew what I was interested in. I didn't really have a calling per se. So that happened. And I thought, well, I got to look more into astrology. I knew something of it, but I now needed to pursue it on a more serious level. And at that same time, another psychic that gives me a different kind of reading, which is, "You're going to be moving south in about 6 months." I said, "I'm not planning to move anywhere." She said, "No, you're going to be moving south. I see the initials VB." I was like, wait a minute, you're talking about Virginia Beach, because we had been talking about Edgar Cayce in our psychic groups. And she said, "Yeah." So I have no plans to do that. Well, at that time, my sister, who's a few years older than me, was traveling cross country in a van. She had bought a van, customized it, took off and traveled cross country. People were doing that a lot back in that day, with her 2 cats. And she was going all over, and she came home and she said, "You know what? My next stop is going to be Virginia Beach." I said, "Are you kidding me?" She said, "No, I want to go learn the Edgar Cayce work. Why don't you come with me?" I immediately dropped everything. I said, "Yes, I'm doing this. This is it." So we moved down to Virginia Beach. We got a winter rental. At the time, Virginia Beach was this small enclave on the Atlantic Ocean, very peaceful. It was a bit of a resort, but nothing like the megalopolis resort it is now. It's totally overjammed, horrible traffic, buildings on top of buildings, condos replacing old charming beach bungalows where they used to be. Anyway, it was quiet back then. We moved down and we rented a winter rental cottage across the street from the beach. It was like being in heaven, and the rent wasn't that much. That was on 70th Street. The Association for Research and Enlightenment, which is the ARE, it's called, the Edgar Cayce Foundation, was on 68th Street. So I was virtually neighbors with the ARE. And I had the beach in front of my house, and I had the ARE to my right, and that was all I needed for that whole time we lived there. And the ARE was really an experience. It had a phenomenal bookstore, as you know, Headless, because you were there. They had a great bookstore. They had an amazing library of all of his readings and all other kinds of metaphysical subjects. And I was in there. If I wasn't on the beach, I was at the ARE. So I decided to volunteer work there so that I could get more exposure to the work. So as a volunteer, I got to meet all these really cool people. It was like a little colony of eclectic people who were sort of like myself. They were seeking meaningful things in the metaphysical realm. They were studying the readings. They were studying alternative health, astrology. There were healers there. There were psychics. I was in hog heaven because that was my element. I just really loved where I was, and I was learning so much. I was taking classes. There were free lectures all the time. And so I was really having a wonderful time opening my mind to all of this metaphysical stuff, especially Edgar Cayce. And as a volunteer, I had access to a lot of the work there. So there also was, I should say first that when Cayce recommended things, he often recommended things like herbs, foods as natural medicine, and a number of appliances that were easily constructed but not easy to find. Nobody was selling these products in stores in the 1920s, 1930s. And there was a gentleman there, a really wonderful man named Tom Johnson, who made it his life's purpose to study the Cayce readings, make all of the remedies and appliances available for purchase. And he had this enormous health food store on the main drag of Virginia Beach. It was called the Heritage Store. And it was like a little department store. He had everything in there. He had things specifically built for sale for people who were following the readings but didn't know how to obtain the treatments that Cayce was recommending. He had preparations made out of the herbs and plants and every kind of imaginable thing Cayce mentioned in his readings. Tom Johnson made sure he researched it and brought it to his store. I think he was the only one in the world who was doing that. So I was always at the store just ogling all the stuff there. I was in awe of all of it, and I was learning how it worked. So Tom Johnson and I became friends, and one day he asked me, he said, I'm doing a book. I'm going to do a book on all the medical readings. Cayce gave about 9,000 medical readings in his lifetime. And Tom had this plan that he was going to put out what he called an encyclopedia of healing. And I was kind of collecting unemployment from the state of New Jersey, and I wasn't working, and that was barely enough to get by. So I needed a job. I didn't really want to go work at a hotel. So Tom said, listen, why don't you become one of my research assistants? You can read all these readings, write synopses of what he's saying, write up the diagnosis, the advice, write up the spiritual advice he's giving, write up the treatments, and I'll pay you under the table. And it was perfect. I could not believe my good fortune. So I got to study about 300 readings and worked on that for the time that I was there, which was 10 months. And the end result was this book, Edgar Cayce, Encyclopedia of Healing, pretty thick. I think I did A through D in this book. It's pretty substantial. My name's in it too, in case nobody believes me. So I worked on this book while I was there, and that was my livelihood, and it was marvelous. I learned so much, and as a result of that, unfortunately, I did come back home to New Jersey after the rental was up because I just couldn't make a living down there. My sister, however, who had brought me there, got a job at the ARE as a senior editor in their publishing department. So she got to meet all of the literati of the Edgar Cayce group. She met all the authors, all the researchers, all the writers, and she edited most of the books that came out over maybe a 7-year period. So she stayed.
Do you know if Manly P. Hall ever made a appearance while your sister was there?
I'm sure he did.
That's interesting.
Yeah, the name is very familiar. I remember his books being in the bookstore.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people showed up there. There was a lot of well-known people. And so she stayed there and was the editor. And she learned, I mean, she should probably be on this show instead of me because she knows Cayce even better than I do. But she got to edit all the manuscripts of the main books that they published over that 7-year period. And that was quite substantial. She still knows people down there. She actually writes articles for the, they have an online magazine now that she writes articles for, Salerno, if you ever notice her name. And she also practices a lot of the Cayce healing techniques. Anyway, so I had this job and I did the research on the book. And I was doing medical readings, which were very specific. And what I learned from them was what unbalances the body. What do you have to have in harmony? What do you have to coordinate in order to maintain health? And there's this whole philosophy that he had that you needed to balance mind, body, and spirit. There were 3 components of what he called an entity or a human being. You had to have all 3 in balance. What I was working on was the body balance. Something he recommended almost all the time was massage therapy. And not just like fitness center massage, therapeutic massage. And I was real interested in that. So when I went back, it was like culture shock. I went from beautiful, peaceful Virginia Beach and the ocean to Midtown Manhattan working at a law firm. And it was a huge shock, but I did not forget what I had learned in Virginia Beach. And I wasn't happy at that kind of work. So in a few years' time, I decided to study massage therapy. And the Swedish Institute was a couple of blocks from where my office was. So I trained in Swedish massage, which is a very demanding physical therapy type of training. You had to learn anatomy, physiology, human pathology. It was not, like I said, like fitness center, rub down kind of thing, feel good kind of thing. So I learned that, and I was practicing, I kind of moonlighted doing that on the side while I still was doing paralegal work. After a while, I felt like I was in tune with the energy I was working with, but I wanted to go deeper. And so Cayce had talked about acupuncture. And what was behind acupuncture was that basically his belief was the body was an electrical entity. Every bit of healing was vibrational based on frequencies, which I still work to this day with that. And so I trained in acupuncture, did 3 years of training, became a licensed acupuncturist. And that was like, because of Cayce, that carried me through many years of training and working and learning about alternative health and various modalities after that, Reiki and I can't even shiatsu, all kinds of stuff. So that carried me through. But I also learned astrology. I was learning astrology at the time. And so the whole combination of metaphysical came through the Cayce experience for me. And I picked up things along the way, like crime astrology. I added that on. But that whole impetus came from Cayce. The whole astrology came from Cayce and from psychics who read me and said, you should do this. You have an innate ability to do this. And so from that is why I say it put me on my life trajectory to this day. And that's why he is one of my personal heroes because of what I learned through him. And the experiences I had and all the experiences subsequent to that just built on that basic learning. One of the most important things being, he had a saying, mind is the builder. What we do, what we manifest, what we create comes directly first from the mind. You can't do something unless you thought it first. And he said, mind is the builder. So mind your mind because you are building yourself into your life experience. And he also said, thoughts are things. And if you think about it, that's true, because if you think of something enough, you will manifest it at some point, or it will manifest for you. And so what he taught was really personal responsibility. Be responsible for your thoughts, because at some point they're going to be creating for you. And in that sense, it was kind of interesting to think that all of our life experience, based on that observation, is that life is a projection of our minds, but it's also a reflection of our minds. Because he said, in every experience, you are meeting self. If somebody's nasty to you, you go to the store and the clerk is nasty, or somebody's uncooperative, how did you fit into that? How did you belong to that experience? What attracted that experience? Because he didn't have a victim mentality. It's like, no, things make sense. You have to study everything that happens for how we relate to it and what is the lesson there.
That's
maybe
really Delphic, know thyself. And that
absolutely.
When you apply that, there's so many different parallels between Cayce and the Greeks,
Oh, for sure.
The Asclepian, for instance, the Asclepian you would go to for healing, and you would do that while you're asleep, and you would be visited by Asclepius. What's interesting too is if you think of the Shoku Rei, the first symbol in Reiki, if you're looking down on it, right, it looks like a snake wrapped around a pole.
Right.
And so the Shoku Rei is even sort of a reflection of that rod of Asclepian as well.
Right. You know what? Since you mentioned that, and I'm so glad you did, Nick, do you want to put up his chart now? I'm going to skip to that because it fits right in. I did his chart, which is brilliant. I mean, this man was so exceptional. But if you want to look at the asteroids, which I'm now addicted to studying since I started doing them a few months ago, one of the most powerful asteroids featured in this chart, I don't know that it's spelled right. I copied it out of the software. It could be a mistake. Asclepius. He is Asclepius rising, basically. He is the healer of healers. He is the channeler of healing. And the fact that you mentioned that, I thought, wow, okay, it's coming out of the chart as well. And he also has a strong relationship to Cassandra. I spoke about her in a show a while ago. Cassandra was a prophetess that nobody listened to. And she would prophesy things and people didn't believe her. And then the thing would happen and it would be really bad and a lot of people would get injured and she would have grief over it. She eventually did away with herself for that reason. But he was a seer, and he prophesied as well as diagnosing illnesses, foreseeing the future, discussing past lives. There was nothing that he couldn't see because his source was the Akashic Records. The Akashic Records kind of brings us into an interdimensional thing where that is a list of records that he says are accessible to all of us. Now, I think we'd have to be pretty damn elevated to be able to reach that level of understanding. But
what's funny is his chart right there, that could be a sentence, right? So Cassandra, nobody listened to him, right? And that was Cassandra's role right? And then Asclepius would be the healer.
Right.
Apollo is the one at Delphi. He's the seer. Right. And Urana, that's the sky. So that's like seeing the whole thing or like a very elevated position. And then Chiron is the teacher.
Exactly.
So that whole thing is like a sentence about his life right there.
That is Edgar Cayce. Those are his asteroids. And Urania also is someone who thinks outside the box. Well, he not only thought outside the box, he lived outside the box. He practiced outside the box because there was no one before or since who did what he did. And yet he was a very humble person, a very simple man. I have the circles here because it is so beautifully melded together how he could synthesize the ethereal, bring it down to earth, manifest it, and explain it to people because he had Pisces, but he also had earth signs and the practical earth signs. He had, and he had Capricorn, and I'm so happy. I've been dumping on Capricorn for months now. He has really positive, strong, helpful Capricorn. I'm always tying Capricorn into these murders that we've talked about and these intrigues that we've covered in like Smiley Face and other cases. He had constructive, well-placed, and productive Capricorn placements. So the Capricorn gave him the materialistic side so that he could put his visions into reality. put them out to the public and help people. And so that's why I circled those three. Pisces is in the middle, which is the ability to connect with the other worlds, the supernatural, the psychic realm, wherever he was getting his information from. He could connect, but he could also bring it down to earth through the Taurus, where his moon was, a very practical placement, and make it work for him through Capricorn. Plus, he has those beautiful asteroids. So that chart was just exceptional. I was blown away by it. And it makes perfect sense for a man of his stature and a very, very unassuming person. There's no ego in this chart. This man, when he was a young child, used to go into the woods and pray, and he would pray to angels. He said that he would see a radiance in the woods among the trees, and he would pray to this radiance. Say, please, I just want to help people. I want to do something that helps people. And he was guided towards that. I know when he was probably a teenager, he was struck in the base of the spine by a baseball. And he temporarily lapsed into a mania. It went a little bit crazy, and then he passed out and went into a coma, and they put him to bed. They didn't know what to do with him. He started to speak while he was under this influence of the coma or the trance. And he said, take some raw onions, chop them up, mix them a poultice with herbs, and put it on the base of my spine. And his parents were, well, we have nothing to lose by doing this. They did that, and he was healed. So that was his first, I think that was his first initiation into, you've prayed for this. This is the way you can achieve that prayer. This is the way you're going to be able to help people. But he didn't really start, his first reading was when he was 24 years old. It was in 1901. And he also had an incident, I believe, Headless, you already talked about that in the past discussion about having laryngitis and being hypnotized. And through hypnosis, he discovered a remedy for that laryngitis. There was another incident, that was really interesting as well, that happened with his young son, Hewlin Cayce. Cayce was a photographer, and back in those days, if you needed light for a photograph, you had to have like a tray of like a sulfuric compound that would explode and give light so that the picture would be visible. And it was very dangerous. Things could catch on fire. People could get hurt. And that happened with his son. His son got too close to the exploding compound and burned his eyes. And the doctor said, your son's not going to be able to see again. His eyes are burned. And so Cayce was very distraught. And he thought, well, I'm going to try this technique that I've been doing. And he went into trance. And he said in trance, you have to peel some potatoes and take the potato skins and put them as a salve over the eyes, put them as a poultice over the eyes, which actually I've tried it. It's very soothing, very healing for eye strain. It felt really wonderful. But he did that with his son, and his sight was recovered. So by then, he's on his way to having discovered what he was praying for, which is this is the way you're going to help thousands of people. So by the 1901, he starts to give the readings to people, and he had his wife would help him, but then he had to hire a secretary because they were getting busy. And he decided, which was a really smart thing to do, was record every single thing that was said during these readings. The only thing he needed to conduct these readings was the name and address of the person. Could be, he was at the time, he was in Kentucky originally, but then he moved to Virginia Beach when he started practicing his work. He'd have an address of somebody in Illinois, let's say John Smith in Chicago, Illinois. That was all he needed to either remote view or read the Akashic record or read the subconscious of the person himself. And he would diagnose the illness, and he would not only diagnose the chemical and physiological reasons for it, he would go into past lives. He would read somebody's 3 or 4 or 5 past lives and say, in Egypt, you were in charge of thus and such, but you shirked your duties, and that's why you have trouble finding work now. He would connect everything karmically as well as physiologically. And he would even read their astrology. He didn't know their birth date. He had their name and he had their address. but he would know what their moon was. Your Venus is well placed, your Mars is not well placed. This is going to cause this. It was remarkable. And I was so intrigued when I was doing this research for this book, how everything would open. He would just look through the person's past, and I mean distant past, remote past, interdimensional past, if you will, and read everything about that up to the present time. And people started to ask him all kinds of things. There was a man who had hundreds of readings done, and he actually helped promote Cayce. He was a businessman, so he was asking for stock tips, and Cayce would give them to him. He'd say, listen, I don't care if you become rich or not, but you just have to be responsible. Whatever you do, be responsible for whatever you're doing with what I give you. Well, the man became a humanitarian. He became very wealthy, and he actually had a hospital built for Cayce in Virginia Beach, which is just steps away from the ARE on the grounds there. And they would administer the treatments recommended in the readings in this hospital. So he influenced a lot of people in many ways. And then people started asking him about the history of the world and how people came to Earth. And the big thing that came through, big knowledge that came through him, was of Atlantis and the primitive lands of millions and millions of years ago on Earth. And we had this running joke in Virginia Beach. We were kind of like a bit clannish because we're all into Cayce. We were all very open-minded people with different bent towards either it was astrology or the supernatural or healing or something of that nature. And so we had this running joke that we were all Atlanteans that came back from Atlantis, and that's like we were congregating at the ARE. So Atlantis was a big topic there. It was very interesting because he tied it with the origins of the world, and not just the origins of the world, but the origins of humanity, which according to him are really interesting. Going back, he starts back like 4.5 billion years ago, and he delineates different epochs where man changed and became something else. And he talks about Atlantis. The most interesting thing about Atlantis is I think we're recreating it right now with AI, except back then it wasn't AI. When Atlantis started, it was a huge landmass between, let's see, the Gulf of Mexico extending all the way over to Europe. That was Atlantis. It covered the Atlantic Ocean. It was a huge mass of land. And he talks about it. Cayce's readings are not easy to understand. If they're health readings, they're concrete and they're easier. But these other readings, he had this very arcane way of speaking when in trance, very rambling, unusual use of words. I can read you something as an example. Somebody asked him, in what form does the Antichrist come, spoken of in the book of Revelation? And this is exactly what he said. In the spirit of that opposed to the spirit of truth. The fruits of the spirit of the Christ are love, joy, obedience, long-suffering, brotherly love, and kindness. Against such there is no law. There are no laws. The spirit of hate, the Antichrist, is contention, strife, fault-finding, lovers of self, lovers of praise. Those are the Antichrist and take possession of groups and masses of people. That's one of the easier ones to read about how he spoke. He would speak, a whole paragraph would be one sentence. So it was hard to read. But what he said about Atlantis was really interesting because he said that first people became as thought forms. It was always interdimensional. He never talked about extraterrestrials or spaceships or UFOs, but the way he talked about people was always coming through another dimension initially. So it could have been ETs. And to me, it never mattered. I just take for granted that they're there and it doesn't matter to me. But he never specifically said that. He just said there's an influx of souls onto the Earth, into the solar system. They come through the star Arcturus, which is in the constellation Boötes, the herdsman. And the herdsman means the shepherd. So we are herded in through Arcturus as a stargate into this solar system. We come in and then we manifest gradually. And the way we manifested in Atlantis was to adapt to the existing land structure. It was initially an energy, a dimension that took concrete form over a long period of time. And what that did for the individuals that eventually manifested was they had a perfect understanding of their surroundings, their environment, the natural laws, and the earth itself. They understood the energy of the earth because they partook of that. They came from that. That's what was their origin. Therefore, they were capable of manipulating energetic forces as well. And what's really interesting is he says the Atlanteans were very gifted at moving enormously heavy objects with ease. There you go.
That's
Atlantis goes down at 10,000 BC. The Pyramid of Giza is built then. And that was built, he believes, built directly to point to the Stargate of Orion above. It's connected by all these lines astronomically. But he's talking about people that were not warlike. The Atlanteans were not a warlike people. They were a cooperative people. And yet what happened was on the earth at that time, which was, they started around 200,000 years ago, and they finally were wiped out by 10,000 BC. There was such a threat of animal predators on the earth at that time that they felt it necessary to devise weaponry. So they began to make, and actually made explosives. They knew how to do that because they understood energy and natural laws of science. So they were fighting, combating animals, and quite successful with the developing technology that they had. And they were, like I said, they were a cooperative community. But people from other lands start coming in, seeing what's going on. Oh, we like what they have. We want what they have. So there began to be strife in the land because somebody's coming in wanting what the Atlanteans had developed.
BD, if I could interject real quick, it
Sure.
could be like part of that mass die-off of the megafauna in North America, right? So around that time period, there was a mass die-off of all these huge creatures, and he's talking about these massive creatures that they would be fighting against.
Right. Yeah, that's and that he said an interesting thing, and I couldn't find out more about it or what it specifically set it off, but he said once they developed that weaponry and that had that strife and conflict with the predatory animals, that was also the beginning of human sacrifice, which is interesting because we are led to believe in our system of thought that human sacrifice was always with us. It was from early on. He's saying it was not from early on, that it was developed. I don't know why in relation to predatory animals. Did we sacrifice people to trap an animal? I don't know what he meant by that.
Jen, how many gods or goddesses associated with human sacrifice are also involved in hunting?
So I'm trying to relate to this from obviously Puranic or a Buddhist perspective, and I have to say that the majority of deities, at least in the Hindu or subcontinental Himalayan pantheon, it's minimal. It really is quite minimal. It's relatively rare that a deity specifically of hunting. Now, of war, sure, there's quite a few of those. The idea of the human sacrifice was really about the goddess, about the primordial mother figure, and how she would require the interchange. It's an exchange between like her and humanity because we pray to things. Like that's sort of innate, I think, in us, is to pray to things, and because we are the closest to the earth, we pray to the mother. That's fine.
I think because Artemis is right.
Something I did actually want to ask you guys, and then we'll get back to you, BD. It was really kind of something that had to go along with something BD brought up. And Jen, I wanted to go with you first, maybe to get your take, and not to put you on the spot. I'm not sure how much you actually know about this man. And then I wanted to get Headless's point of view on it. I know BD had mentioned before that he doesn't say extraterrestrials. So, I mean, I guess they can leave it open to your own interpretation to an extent. And I was wondering do you look at kind of as like, you know, alchemy, allegory? Is it higher dimensional things? Is it kind of like a portal? Like, how do you look at, like, I guess what BD was talking about, I guess like the progression or transgression of like the soul into the flesh, like the way she was explaining it before. How do you take that? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's your look on the way that you look at things? Because in some way, I almost think like you might see a huge maybe crossover with even the stuff you're into, in a sense. You know,
It's
No,
huge
I-
on alchemy.
that's what
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, this is a great question, Nick, and obviously BD sets a tone for how I have to respond. But I think it matches perfectly. Like, do I agree with the exact timeline? 4 billion years? Not really, but that's the same with the Vedas. They say like these crazy long times. So I don't know I don't know for sure. But I think talking about transmigrations of the soul, like whether using the Kabbalistic tree or you're using Buddhism, I think it all makes sense. I think it really fits. It provides like a very full cosmology of the world. Like, we move from formlessness into form, and then that's the same with Kabbalah too. And you know, we emanate downwards into creation. And I just think, wow, I mean, he's onto something. Like, whether it is a metaphor or whether it's, I personally don't believe in aliens. I'm not like an ET guy, but I think that we do live in a multi-dimensional world. Like, we live in the 3-world system, and you know, I think this all makes sense. I think it makes sense in a very literal way that we are in control of our plane. Like, humanity is in control of our plane. I think about this a lot, and how we create our own archons. Like, we literally elevate people who are not gods, who are not asuras, who are not demons. We elevate them into these kind of figurative positions. And you know, that doesn't mean that those people, like Sri Aurobindo believes that Stalin was an asura but wearing a human skin, and he also said the same thing about Hitler. Hitler was an asura wearing a human skin. That doesn't make those people magical or special. It just means that they have a closer connection to that plane of consciousness. So if you're an asura, you're going to be more warlike, you're going to be more destructive. Like, that is your innate nature. But you can change your nature. I mean, that's what Buddhism is about. Like, everyone can tame themselves. So there's no point to, I think of it, I guess from my perspective, is I think of it like, wow, we really are special. We really can control so much of reality and our perception of things, of course, because I think I always say that. And so I think this makes a lot of sense. I find it very pro-human. Yeah. I guess what he's saying.
Yeah. Well, and one thing before we move on to Headless's opinion, like another reason why I ask is, like, even my opinion, I think sometimes I would go with maybe demons, angels, aliens. A lot of times I think those things can be like being used in a way to explain like a higher self, and people end up getting a little confused. And like, I think what you were saying, kind of put these things on pedestals, and like, you know, you're kind of not getting what's going on here. You know what I'm saying? So, like, you know, like some people may gravitate towards, you know, oh, St. Michael's, you know, talking to me, or, you know, this angel's talking to me, or an alien. And it's like, not saying that they're confused. Maybe they're telling them just like a silly story. But like, sometimes I do think it might be a little bit deeper than like what they're actually, you know, what people are understanding is being said, especially if it's from an occultist. You know what I'm saying? You have to start wondering if you start talking about angels and like certain other things of entities, or I guess, again, like what I was saying, could it be alchemy? Could you really be talking about your own self or your own progression and somehow making a story out of it? You know? All right. And then on to you, Headless.
I was going to say, you know, that nailed it right there for me. So there's so much of an interplay between the transmigration of souls and the concept of the universe, and it fits perfectly with, you know, astrology, because as the soul is traveling towards Earth, towards the middle, it's diverted and changed by the path of these, you know, heavenly objects, which changes the shape of that soul and how it relates to everything else. So you're talking about, you know, sort of a literal energy source that he's describing, sort of like this conscious energy source that makes up everything. I think that's really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. I like that. All right, PD. I mean, you probably forgot where we cut you off from earlier, but I don't know if you...
No problem. No, that was perfect. So I was talking about Atlantis, and what I found really interesting, and I haven't heard this anywhere else, was he described the progression of humanity starting from very early on. Now, he said it traced Atlantis to maybe 200,000 years, but he goes 10 million years before that. But he's talking about 4 what he calls root races. And I found it fascinating that the first 2 root races were peoples who were not sexually identified. They were, I assume, hermaphroditic. They were not male female.
You know, really
They were
interesting.
one and go ahead.
Really interesting. I just want to throw this in there real quick. When you're saying root races, you know, I was looking into we covered Empedocles on the Occult Rejects. I'll end up dropping like months from now probably. But you know, one of the reasons why I wanted to cover him, besides he was pointing at the eyeball like 500 BC, he was one of the first people, supposedly they think, that actually started with the idea of the elements, and he called them roots originally. They were called roots, not elements.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. He's saying root races. I mean, that could be. I mean, just from my opinion, I think Aleister Crowley and a few other people kind of ripped off Empedocles. So I'm just wondering, like, was there an inspiration even with calling it root races? You know, you actually kind of going back to, if you understand the older terminology, that's elements. You know, I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah. No, I don't know where he got that from, but it was actually a synopsis that somebody did studying the readings about antiquity, that when he talked about the nature of and the origin of people. It was interesting. Not until the 3rd root race were we male and female, and the first male and female in that race, I think that's going maybe either 50 or 100,000 BC, were Emilius and Lilith. And I found that interesting because Lilith, and I believe it is Jewish mythology, Lilith was originally with Adam before Eve. Except in Cayce's view, he doesn't mention that. He mentions Emilius and Lilith. And Adam and Eve, we did not have the Adamic body until the 4th root race of Adam and Eve. And what's really fascinating, and I've heard this now from a number of sources, but Cayce said it. He said the 5th root race is going to be genetically mutated and will become present in the earth starting, it's either the year 2027 or the year 2033 or the year 2038. Now, we're not going to see that because they're going to be babies. We won't see the manifestation of them until they're, at least 15, 20 years after those dates. But that is supposed to be a genetically modified race again of humanity, where they
I'd be too
are
old and too tired for that bullshit. Oh, man.
Yeah.
No way. I'd be like, what, my 60s? I'd be like, fucking for real?
But they're supposed to not
70s.
have, they're supposed to be devoid of a victimhood mentality. They're supposed to be very, very enlightened, very evolved group of people, because somehow the gene mutated by then. And other people have said that, but I got that from this study of the root races. I don't know, I've heard it in a couple of sources, but that's what he says about it. And we have yet to see it, so we don't know. But that was an interesting take on sort of how humanity evolved from basically a form, and as in Atlantis, took the form of the earth and understood the energies, and then eventually got taken over and destroyed by the advancement of the technology that they had. And before that even happened, they were breaking up into the ocean anyway. They were breaking up into many, many islands. But he says that records do exist still in the Pyrenees. The Basque people came down from that, descended from that line. There's records in the Bahamas and the Yucatan Peninsula, and I think the island of Bimini. He said there's still evidence of Atlantis in those locations. We just haven't found it. And so that's what he has to say basically of that. But it's interesting that evolution was going on, and we've seemed primed towards that kind of possible mass destruction in this past century. and that took them out. Who knows in our case? But that was one big thing. And the origin of humanity, I thought was really interesting. Mostly what I really focused on was the medical readings, because I did take that path in my career for several years to do that. And what the interesting part of that is it all ties together through vibrations and frequencies, going through a dimension, manifesting on a certain level from another level. And I got to work with a number of alternative modalities that utilize that, and they were extremely effective. He had stuff like something called the violet ray. He was working with ultraviolet light and different colored
That's
glass. He
interesting.
would pass sunlight through a green glass. If somebody had a blood disease, you could treat that by passing sunlight through a green glass onto their body. He developed something else called the wet cell because
Did he ever hook up with Raymond Rife?
I don't think they were alive at the same time, but I don't think they did. But Rife, I'm very familiar with also.
That would have been.
They were both
epic.
saying the same thing. It would have been phenomenal. I think Rife got murdered in the early 1930s, and Cayce was around still until 1945. But no, they both said the same thing basically. And Rife just took it to another level with his, the plasma machine and then the Rife machine, which I've worked with extensively. I got one years ago and I've worked with it a lot. It was a phenomenal thing to have. But it was basically he also had a lot of appliances that worked with the batteries and cells. You could heal a broken bone with a low current of electricity. He made something called a wet cell battery, and you just attach it to the skin over the broken bone, and it would expedite healing of the broken bone. And just a lot of stuff, which just trying to make sure I checked it off on my list. Different types of, there's something called atomidine, which is atomic iodine, where the nature of iodine was chemically enhanced. And it's such a potent remedy that you would want to take a tiny drop in a glass of water. That's all you could take. It's too strong. I've had that. That's for glandular treatment, stuff like thyroid. And he was a big proponent of castor oil, which is simply the oil of a plant called the Palma Christi, which means palm of Christ, hand of Christ. And castor oil has multiple purposes. Like we use it in my household all the time. And just basic things. He believed that the earth provided you with all the sources of healing that you needed. It was all there. You just had to find it. That's why the Heritage Store was so important. They made those remedies available to people that were hard to get, like herbs that were hard to find, herbs that didn't grow in that part of the country. And it's just a wonderful experience. It gave me a faith in the earth that we are provided for. It is all presented for us. It's a complete system that we can draw on. And of course, I've been very opposed to modern medicine most of my life. I don't go to doctors. I heal myself. And thanks to the Cayce, I have a zillion remedies to rely on before I even have to think of that. So it's just been a wonderful experience and mind-blowing experience to how things or just right in front of us, they are available to us. Medicine tells us we have to buy synthetic drugs. We do not have to. But if you get so sick to a point where you're in crisis, then I do believe emergency drugs are helpful. But basically, that was what I learned. And it kind of gives you a faith in things, that things really are there for us. Things were provided for humanity. We weren't flung here into the depths to suffer, I mean, it happens, and it's supposed to happen a lot of times, but there are things that we can rely on in our environment that will be helpful. Unfortunately, a lot of them get polluted or destroyed or made unavailable to us, but they are there. And he was pretty much enhanced my awareness of that.
One thing I wanted to ask real quick, maybe I'll just give Headless time because I see he wants to say something, but there's noise. One thing I just wanted to ask you on your opinion, or maybe you actually know, do you think he was using any older tables that might have been known or from the past that was kind of suggesting the herbs and their usage? You know what I'm saying? Like, could he have been going back to the Agrippa? You know what I'm saying? Or did he come up with these on his own? You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just wondering, do you know, like, did he have any influence on, like, where he might have gotten his associations on, like, the herbs and how they would help?
I think when it comes to him, it seems like he's much more intuitive than Agrippa. Agrippa
that was just an
has-
example. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
like I could say, like, did Scott Cunningham rip off Cayce? You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I'm getting at. I'm just like wondering, and not even saying ripping off. Is just I was wondering if he had an influence maybe of where he might have gotten his herbal remedies from. That's all.
I think when it comes to Cayce's herbal remedies, it seems like he's much more into the energetic realm than he is into the actual properties of the plant, because he's got, you know, a lot of different associations going on that you don't really find in regular herbal medicine. They've got a pretty tight list of things that they go with, and the way he uses them is not the way that other herbal remedies have done it. Am I on the right track there, BD?
Yeah, I think you are.
I was wondering
think
if he
so
just
that
had his own stuff.
Yeah.
When he was prescribing remedies, I'm not sure of the source of the information. I don't know that would have been Akashic record. I don't know where that was coming from, but it was just this super consciousness of things, and maybe through remote viewing. I really don't know. I've always tried to understand that and never quite succeeded at it. But I don't think that was Akashic record. I think that was just drawing on the collective consciousness of those plants and those organisms, reading the energy of those.
Sorry, guys.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Jen.
sorry, Nick.
No, go, Jen. Go.
Okay, I just want to add about the Heritage Store products before we move on, is that I know a lot of people who were interested in spiritualism and spiritism, and like occult sort of practices have different popularity phases. And when I was really getting into it, it was like Santeria, it was like hoodoo, it was like all that stuff was really popular. So I know a lot of people who are into that would only buy Heritage Store products because they had what they believed was an increase potency, like for their floral water, their grapefruit water, their lavender water. Everybody would use that for their altars. So I just wanted to say that. And then also about the herbal remedies, I would love if you guys would give like some examples, and then at least I could think through it. But even with the onion on the spine, like BD said, onion with herbs mixed together. That makes a lot of sense though, because it's like sulfur is like a base component of onion. It's also like a very alchemical, like Nick was saying, very alchemical. It's drawing down to that energy center, like that's right at where your spine is meeting. So I think that there is something there where and it's onion is also, well, it's interesting because onions are root. So you could say it's Saturnian, but then you could say it's pungent like a Marshall plant, because garlic is also a Marshall plant and it's very pungent.
Yeah,
it's also
goes with Mars.
Yeah, exactly. But then there's also a Saturnian element, and then you have the sulfur there as well. So it's like an activating fire, and then it's a bone, because like Saturn is very associated with bones and like broken bones especially. And so I think there's something really interesting with that, and consciousness, because you have that really deep connection between like Binah and Yesod. So you've got like this thing, you're saying he went to a manic state, that's very like herbal astrology, that's very like Yesod, and then you have him sort of sleeping, that's very Binah, but sort of outside of form in a way. So I don't know, there's something really interesting there.
Well, do you want me to name some of the remedies so you could sort of figure out what they are? I mean, I'm familiar with them because they were in all these readings. Okay, you talked a lot about, all right, sassafras, burdock root, essential oils, which you could just go myrrh, frankincense, lavender. You can go on and on with essential oils. Guchu leaf, yellow dock root, plantain weed, valerian, use turpentine of all things, which is actually good for massage therapy. Castor oil, I mentioned, potato skins, olive oil, and peanut oil. He was a big proponent of as a body application for like internal problems like circulatory problems, musculature problems. Another big thing was balancing the acid pH in the bloodstream. Blood chemistry was real important to healing. So it was acid alkaline balance. And that was achieved primarily through diet. I'll just open the book and see what, pick a remedy in here and see what he says.
You know what I wanted to ask too, real quick, with you guys. When it comes to like the Akashic records, could you, I don't know if you guys are into or understand transcendental meditation or the idea behind it. Do you think that's almost like the same objective with transcendental meditation, is kind of to tap into the Akashic records to get like ideas and information?
That's certainly a form of it. I think there's so many different types of meditations that, the Akashic record meditation would definitely be a form of it.
Yeah, because sometimes I've like I could, just for me, being like the way even David Lynch explains transcendental meditation, I could see that very much actually fitting like the whole way I talk about the eclipse and the pin dots starting. So I do, and then, like I say, eventually once you get to the eclipse, it starts to like kind of like feed you information if you sit there long enough. It's really weird, and I may end up having her on. The tattoo artist that's doing my tattoo, so she knows I have the podcast, and she knows I'm an occultist, and I had said something about like the eclipse, and she came out and said, she's like, what's crazy? She says that when she does not automatic writing, but like she'll do art, and she says a lot of times she'll put herself into a meditation, and she says an eclipse will show up in her mind's eye, and then she just starts fucking going crazy and starts designing her shit. I was like, fuck. I was like, how did I get you as an artist? This is perfect.
Too spot on.
Yeah. Yo, my head I almost broke my neck when she said the eclipse. I was like, yo, what the fuck? I was like, I'm not alone.
Well, I have a story for you, Nick, that you'll like about this exact topic. So the founder of Japanese esoteric Buddhism, so tying it into Headless's point about Reiki, but we're talking about Shingon Buddhism, which came to Japan in about 900. So the founder of that was called Kukai. And Kukai had a special mantra that was given to him by one of these higher forces, a bodhisattva, so a Buddha, who is considered the void mandala Buddha. So that's what he is. He's the kind of the king of the void realm. So what the void realm mantra does is it increases your intellectual and memory capacity to infinite. It's infinite growth. So when he was saying the mantra, if you accomplish it, meaning that you gain the magical power associated with the mantra, he is able to access this kind of jhana or knowledge place, this place of knowledge, which happens during the eclipse. So that he describes this kind of thing where he came to the shores after training in China. He comes to Japan. He doesn't know what to do. He sits in a forest. He recites the mantra, and then the bodhisattva, whose name Akasha Garba, literally like the void realm mandala Buddha, he gives him like a vision of a place where he is to build the first Shingon monastery. So I think, I think absolutely that there are, especially tantric Buddhism. Now, this is specifically tantric, but I also think that there are other kinds of Buddhism that do have these very intensive kind of jhana states and meditation. But again, it does depend on, what kind you're doing, what flavor and all of that. But for sure, because like Tantra is just magic, right? Like it's a kind of magic, a kind of theurgy. So yeah, you're definitely working towards going to that place, whether that's Dath or, somewhere else. And I think that correlates in all religions or all magical systems, at least to an extent.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much, man.
Yeah, I think the Kabbalah really nails a lot of practices into really specific areas within that tree, which is so valuable when you're trying to measure the different results of these things, especially in parapolitical measures.
Oh, yeah, for real, because they are really crafty like that. You almost have to start looking at it from like multiple different like angles of pantheons to like kind of almost put the whole thing together. I see what you're saying, especially with we don't want to get the if there's actually any Jewish people that practice Kabbalah listening to the show, Hermetic Kabbalah. Don't want to get them upset. Yeah, no, I did have one. There was some kid's show I went on one time, and he was actually really into the Kabbalah, but he was Jewish. But he was really into his shit. I give the kid 100% credit. He understands his version of it. And when I would start getting into mine, he almost took it as blasphemy and perversion. And I'm like, well, this is the Hermetic, because he'd be like, that's not the Kabbalah. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, no, that's Hermetic Kabbalah. Sorry, guy.
Dude, it gets so much worse when you realize that they copied the Kabbalah off of the theogony. So they're using the theogony to construct their Kabbalah tree. And then when they're shown the original, they freak out and they say that can't be right.
Yeah.
Because it's all this interpretation that they did.
Well, I mean, it really started in Iran. So, I mean, it was a syncretic effort, I think, and it was definitely part of the Aristotelian dialectic of moving God into the 4-quadrant system, time, space, light, and dark. And I think that the different densities that probably came later, but I think that a lot of the original thinking about it was I sort of position it on my own show as like a reconstitution rather than a copy. Like, they are putting things together that are meant to go together, but it's an incomplete system, and that's sort of why it's important it traveled through North Africa, traveled through the Middle East, and then we have the systems like Mahavijaya in Nepal. So it's just a tree. It's just a tree with 11 spheres. It's exactly the same thing. It's a complementary. We're looking at different sort of versions all over the world. Like, we're reading Inner Teachings of Taoism book right now in one of my group chats, and it's so similar. Like, it is literally, I mean, you could just do a Kabbalistic interpretation. They're talking about true lead is the weight of, or is balanced by true mercury. And it's all Kabbalah.
Can I give you a quick example? So in the Greek Kabbalah system, which was pretty much perfected in Egypt under the Ptolemies, that's where they also wrote the Septuagint. And they had professional basic hermeticists transcribing the Jewish myths into the Septuagint. And they said they had 72 priests that memorized the entire text perfectly, and they all got it the same. That's what the Romans came up with to validate the Bible. But, I don't believe that was real. But they called this book, the Septuagint, the Big G. So, when you add those pieces together, you kind of start seeing the black and white chessboard.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's really interesting. Headless, I try and look at it for more of a perennial system, like more different people are reconstructing the tree in their own way. And I don't really look at the trees necessarily as incomplete as a whole. I think they're just different interpretations. So, for me, I look at it a little more holistically. Like, I don't look at it like good or bad or this is incomplete or complete. It's all pieces of knowledge, and then it's up to us to use our sort of skill of discernment to, penetrate the densities and figure out what is the truth or what is the not truth.
Something I want to ask you real quick, and I don't want to get too far off topic here, but it was something that you said that caught my attention, and I have been wondering myself. I don't know so much about Kabbalah, but you said, did you think that the Kabbalah came from Iran?
That's what I personally think, yes.
I'm not, I really don't know much about that, but I have been wondering more about Middle Eastern stuff. Just from my experience from people that I have seen that had somewhat of a name within the OTO, especially even Crowley. They had spent time and was very interested in the Middle East. Crowley had
the Assyrians had the first depictions of the Kabbalah tree. So that's pre-Persian, but that influence really did have a lot of effect on the Persian people.
Well, there's even arguments that they think alchemy, the idea of alchemy, really all kind of came out of the Middle East. So what I was getting at is there is stuff again, seeing Crowley or McMurtry or other people dressed up in certain garb and over in the Middle East, and you're not really pumping out too much about your experience or a Muslim or that Arabic, whatever type of stuff you're into or you're studying, makes me think there might be something to it if you're not actually talking about it too much. You know, and like just a lot of things that I've been looking at lately seems to be pointing towards the Middle East more for origins of some deep shit.
Yeah, I agree with this, Nick.
I hate to say that. I'd love to say it was somewhere else.
No, I think there's something really interesting about this because there's the Vedic text is called the Book of Wonders, but it's also an Arabic text and it's also a Mughalized text, meaning it came originally from Iran. And it talks about certain astrological conditions and things like I think I spoke about this on the last show I was on about how the black cube is really not a Saturnian gemstone, at least onyx and gold together. Onyx and gold together is really this gemstone of the Jinn of the sun, Jinn with a D. So that makes a lot of sense, right? In certain formulations, like yes, of course, Binah is dark blue or almost black, but I think that you can also make a good argument that that actually makes a lot of sense, and that's how we think of it in Jyotish, like more of a Jyotish perspective, rather than this. Yes, the physical sun is a ruby, but then what else is there? So I think there's a lot that we don't know in terms of that, specifically like Iran, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, like that was like there are major monoliths there are megaliths, excuse me, and a major I think I always talk about this, is about the Gesar of Ling, the world's longest recited epic. It takes 3 days to recite completely. I mean, there's a story about him as a king going to Ukraine, fighting the Khazarians. I mean, this is all contained in this like ancient epic, and it's just how few people even know that it exists. I think it's an interesting sort of place to start, at least.
Burial mounds of giants too, tons of them, all over that area.
Oh, that's interesting. There's mounds? Any mounds around there?
Yeah, it's all mountainous. It's like it's almost like an extension of the Himalayas, actually. It's like the northern, if you took the Himalayas and then you that's what happens is they keep going. They become the Altai Mountains. But it's all, I mean, it's insane. It looks like, you can tell, it's like, I don't know what the Earth is. I don't know about the continents or anything, but you can see this idea of like the sort of plates coming together. That's probably one of the few places where you could like visually see it and it looks like how they describe it to us in school.
All right. I know we got totally way off, but again, you want to bring it back? Any Headless or BD? Did you want to go get back to?
I had something else to throw in. So the Arabic pagans were a very, very different culture that really did have a lot of influence on early biblical stuff. If you look at the three kings, the three wise men, like that was huge in the New Testament. And so they're basically telling you from which frame of reference you should understand the rest of this book. And then it goes into all the symbolism having to do with the New Testament. You know, you've got donkeys, you've got sheaves of grain, you've got all of these different astrological symbols repeated over and over again in the New Testament. So I think there is something to that angle coming through all throughout history when it comes to like healer cults. It always goes back to astrology as well. And what did the Catholic Church do? They basically monopolized all these different scientific discoveries having to do with the stars.
Well, it is interesting, I will just say, about the three wise men is that in like Hermetic Catholicism or whatever, esoteric Catholicism, the three wise men are actually considered to be sort of magi whom you can invoke sometimes, especially on Christmas or Epiphany. And you get the priest to bless a piece of chalk, and then you can write CMB, Christus Mansionem Benedictus, Christ bless this house, above your door. So that is something that people, like Agrippa talks about, how to hide the chalk under the altar. And so and then you have to go retrieve it after mass is done. But it's a funny story just because I think there is this like esoteric, and obviously the three wise men are depicted as Zoroastrian. So yeah, they definitely had a very complex cosmological and advanced mathematical thinking of the whole world. I think that's totally true.
And in Arabia, there were 6 Kaabas originally before the Christians the Christian, Jewish, Arabs took over as the Muslims. So there were 6, and then they went out and destroyed the other 5, and they only left the one, and that one was for Allah. So, they were a very peaceful, accepting people. They had all of the different deities all over all of their temples, right? So they were just like, come as you are. We accept everybody's religion. They actually kind of collected religions. And it was a very peaceful place, and these guys traded with the rest of the world. These guys actually took the Silk Road out to China and back. Well, after the Muslims took over, they just conquered all of the places that they used to trade with. So that's why they spread so quickly from 90 AD onward. Which is, that's a lot of knowledge being encoded in their books.
Yeah. It was like 92, right? Or something like that. Sorry. All right. BD, did you want to go back to anything was there anything that you had planned that you would like to brought up?
No, if you have questions or you want me to talk more about the herbs, we were starting to talk about herbs, their relationships to the planets and energies and stuff. There's a ton of those, but I would dig them out of the book. I don't know if you want me to do that.
Yeah, if you want to, you can.
Yeah, I could find.
That'd be pretty cool, actually.
Okay.
I have to put you on the spot.
Oh, there was a funny story. Well, we're talking about Egyptian and old stuff going back and the symbolism of it. Cayce had a dream one time where he dreamed of a mummy. The mummy came to him and said, if you eat this food, it is very well balanced and it's very beneficial. And it was Syrian figs or dates mixed together with cornmeal or cracked wheat. And Tom Johnson actually got this recipe and they called it mummy food. They sold it in like these little plastic tubs at the Heritage Store, and I started to get it. It's a great snack. And it does something for your blood. It's very, very balancing for your metabolism and your blood sugar. And just that coming from a dream, and whatever the symbolism of that could have been, a fig and cornmeal or fig and wheat, it's and energetically so comforting and healing for the body. That was one way that he would get things through dreams. He would get things through trance. Through reading people's subconscious psychically. I mean, it was a fountain of information from all sources. But food was very beneficial and medicinal, certain types of food. But another thing that he recommended I used extensively is cider vinegar made from apple cider. Uh-huh. And actually, I drink that every morning because it helps balance the acid in your body. And that is something that, believe it or not, if you get a serious burn, if you poured apple cider vinegar on it, it sounds weird. It sounds like it's going to sting, but it almost instantly will remove all pain from the burn and inflammation. And I've seen it. I've seen people get burned, and my sister and I would think, you got to put cider vinegar on it. Stuff that's just very basic. That's very healing. And the oils he talked about, let me just get a couple of herbs here if I could find it. Prayer and fasting was important. Of course, now that I want the herbs, I'm not finding them. Hydrotherapy, bath, colonics, stuff with water was a very big therapeutic modality as well. Hot and cold showers. Sitz baths, which is sitting in a warm tub of water. Sweats. I remember going to the ARE and going into a sweat cabinet. You would go in naked and you would just be up to your neck. You'd be in the cabinet and just your head was above it. And it would like be a sauna, an intense steam bath. And I almost passed out in there. I had to go tumbling out of it face first. There I'm laying naked on the floor and people had to come help me. It was just too intense, but that was one of the remedies, hydrotherapy. Okay, spirits of camphor, mutton tallow, which I believe is from sheep, oil of pine needles, olive oil, peanut oil, lanolin, sassafras, tincture of myrrh, camphorated olive oil. I know you could buy all that at the Heritage Store. electrotherapy,
You know what's interesting?
massages.
I wonder
Yeah.
if the Kellogg's were kind of doing shit like that a little bit prior to him. So I find that interesting. I wonder if he had heard about it, like if that some of that stuff might have already been like kind of known in the underground circuit.
Part of that was about the hot springs. So basically, they would own these hot springs that people would go to in the wintertime. And then, basically it was a good way to heat up, and it was free and everybody could go there. So, hot springs in the wintertime were really big out in the West. And so, they started doing these different healing practices at the hot springs.
Mhm.
It could be interesting. Like the hot springs themselves could have had like a low dose of radiation that actually made you feel better, and that's all it was.
Yep.
Oh no, that's true. I think that's totally true. And the mineralization, for sure.
Yeah. They'd be like, yeah, we cured you.
I did notice, BD, that a lot of his herbs were liver herbs, like yellow dock is sassafras is a great. It's also a blood builder, but they're all Jupiter. So he's got like all his herbs are ruled by Jupiter, at least those ones. And then also Venus. Some of the things like plantain is a Venus herb, castor is a Venus herb.
Right.
So I think that's really interesting because that's more on the ideas, right?
Yeah, he was really big on detoxifying. Of course, the liver is what you got to go to for that. But he was very big on flushing out toxins, impurities. And that was the reason for the sweats, for the poultices to draw things out, and to also draw eliminations, having regular eliminations, drawing toxins out of the body. So the liver was big. In fact, he recommended, and I've done it in the past, you take castor oil, put it on a piece of cloth or a piece of flannel, cover your liver with it, and put a heating pad on top of it. And you can go to sleep with that. I found that I generate enough body heat. I don't need a heating pad. Put it on and go to sleep with it. And it does help to cleanse the liver. And that's real easy. I mean, you don't have to do anything. You just put it on and go to sleep. So, but the detox was important with the liver, and Jupiter definitely reflects that. And he also was big on small doses of gold chloride. That would relate to, I believe, gold is the sun, but it was recommended for arthritis, which is Saturn, and the sun and Saturn opposed by sign Aquarius Leo. So you're treating one with its opposite.
That's very Culpeper, I will say.
Yeah.
Like Nick was looking for that historical name. I think, I definitely think it. But it was also like they were right. The eclectics were active in the 1850s, so you have that whole influence of naturopathy and this different modalities, but also with herbs. So they're incorporating a lot of the Native American herbs into their pharmacopoeia. So this makes a lot of sense. And sassafras is native to the U.S. So I think that's really interesting, specifically Virginia. So.
Oh yeah.
Little sassafras and pepper, you'll have yourself a party.
I didn't know if I should say anything about that, but yes, you can. You need a huge quantity, but you can produce certain, we'll call them entheogens from sassafras. But you need huge quantities, and don't do that. It's illegal, so don't. Do
Well, you don't. You just need to take pepper beforehand, because pepper shuts down your liver, and so you don't actually flush it into your liver. You flush it into your bloodstream, so you're actually, it's an MAOI inhibitor.
Very interesting. Very interesting. It's a science show now. Love it. Anything else you guys wanted to talk about? You guys good?
Man.
Yeah, I
This
mean,
is
when it
really
comes to him,
mind-blowing.
I don't know much, so it's kind of really on you guys here. But
Well,
if
if
you
anybody
guys
had questions, that would be it. But I think I've covered what I was going to go over pretty well. Unless there's questions or something, like I said.
yeah,
How many speeches did you go to?
At the beach?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I don't know. I don't remember. I was there for 10 months, and I was doing classes and lectures, a fair amount. I couldn't even tell you. It was a while ago. But whatever there was, I took full advantage of it. I was
nice.
always in the bookstore. I was always in the library, always in the heritage store or on the beach. That was my world back then.
That's pretty
So,
cool.
Yeah.
I actually do have a question, Beatty. Sorry, Headless.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, I remember when we discussed this that Cayce would sometimes say an angel, or he had an angel, a specific angel. Do you remember its name? I'm sure you do.
I'm sure I don't.
No, you don't? Okay. No problem. I apologize.
I'm sorry. I probably should know, but he did refer to various angels. I'm sure, but I did not, in my research for this, did not come across any. I was looking at medical stuff and Atlantis mostly.
Well, no problem. I just was curious because, like, the angel stuff, it makes a lot of sense. Also planetary, and then you can say herbs. With the different angels, I think that's really interesting. And since the Heritage Store tends to focus on a lot of mercurial and solar energy, like the grapefruit water, that's very solar. Lavender water, that's very mercurial. So I just think that's interesting. And sometimes Raphael is associated with Mercury. Sometimes, not always.
Oh, yeah,
but
you're right. Yeah, I think there was something about I saw it written in some planetary magic book. I don't know. They were taking some quote from somewhere where Raphael is like shows up with like a bag of like some ointment that supposedly heals somebody. So like that's where they get like the mercurial, I guess, connection. But I have seen like you're saying Raphael used for Mercury, and I've also seen him used for the sun. I think if you go by planetary magic and by Kabbalah, it's actually different too. I could be wrong. But I do see how you could interchange. Sure.
100%. Mercury is very close to the sun in some ways. I mean, it definitely takes cues, if you want to say it like that. If you want to, it takes energy from the sun or this energy goes to the moon and then that goes to Mercury. You could also say it like that. But I think that I think Nick's right. I think it's one of those planets that has a very strong relationship with the sun. So it can be interchangeable. And sometimes Michael is used for Mercury and the sun as well. In some lists, obviously, it depends on your system. But yeah, I think there's something really interesting there. I haven't quite cracked it yet, but I'm going to try to.
And it's just an interesting fun fact: the Devil card connects Mercury to the sun.
That's interesting.
Yes, yes.
It makes a lot of sense astrologically because of how close Mercury is to the sun.
Oh yeah, it's the closest one. It only takes 88 days to circle it, so that's pretty close.
88.
Yeah, it's fast.
It's interesting. Very interesting. One thing I did want to ask, and it's kind of silly question, but it is actually, serious. You never ran into David Wilcox there, did you?
He was after I was down there.
Oh, okay. All right. I was just wondering.
Yeah, the guy that
I was
claims to
hoping
be-
he at least showed up with the claims he makes.
No, and in my day, I don't think anybody would have paid him much mind. I mean, he got there after I was there, and the area had started to change and go in a direction where they were looking to increase membership, and they were bringing on some people that were a little bit more material minded than I think Cayce intended it to be. But no, I didn't, fortunately did not come across his path. There were some other fakes down there, but we knew who they were, so they were kind of harmless.
That's another thing. Like when you were there, did you like come across like people that you were like, wow, these are not, now I'm not saying so much of Cayce's stuff, but I'm assuming you must have came across other people that might be into different things, passing by, know who you were, whatever. Did you ever come across like people that you're like, man, like, wow, there's like grifters out there? Like there was was there like known people that they're such
absolutely
fucking shysters?
That is endemic to that community because of what we do and the way we believe. We are also susceptible to stuff that sounds good and seems to fit the jargon. But it's grift, like you said. Yeah, I know there were people like that. We used to like laugh about it. It's like you're going to get a couple of rotten apples in those barrels. So we just kind of took it as fun, Yeah.
It's kind of like weird too. Like if you think about it, and then maybe we'll get you another question and we'll wrap it up. When you start like even thinking about cults now, I'm not saying that this was a cult, but when you start talking about grifters. You know, like sometimes you start kind of getting in like the cult-minded thing, and it's like, you know how like then you almost kind of had to provide a piece of property and start like kind of at least like have something if you really want to start really, you know, getting a fucking cult following. And it's like now, like due to podcasting, you don't even like need to provide people anything. They're just gonna give you their shit. Like they'll just give you money and you don't even have to provide anything to them except for fucking voices in their head. Like I think like due to podcasting and social media, I think cults actually have transformed and people have not even realized it. Like you don't have to be on a compound anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like people have gotten that good and that shisty. They can get, you know, they can slow drip you for silliness. You know, I don't know. I don't know how I got off on that, but I was just thinking of like cults and stuff.
No, that's NLP. That's totally what a lot of these guys would study is NLP to try and get as much money out of people
Tim
as
Pool,
possible.
perfect example.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
Oh God, I could go on about him forever. But Jen or Headless, you got any other questions for BD?
Oh man.
Not to put you on the spot. If you don't, we can wrap it up.
No, I'll ask one. I actually have one. So BD, when you were there, is there anything about Virginia Beach in particular that would have drawn metaphysically minded, but specifically healers? Do you think that there's some kind of geomantic or energetic or, you know, influence?
Jin, there's a massive labyrinth right out in front of it. So they've got all that geomantic energy right there.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Is that kind of almost like The Shining?
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. Huh. That's pretty cool.
But it's just in tile. It's a classic Celtic style labyrinth.
Yeah, that was in their meditation garden, I believe. It's in front. It's sort of in back of the ARE, but in front of what used to be the Cayce Hospital. There's a meditation garden where I think is what you're talking about. The labyrinth was, as I remember it being. Of course, it's changed since I was there. Yeah.
That's a good spot for the drone.
Oh, for sure, it's a landing pad.
You gotta get a visual of that with the drone. I will say that is something that I have noticed, and I really.
So are we all going to Virginia Beach? Is that what we just determined?
I haven't been down there for quite a while. I'm due to go back. I used to go every year. After I moved back home, my sister stayed there because she was working there, and I went back every year for quite a while. I haven't been back though since I don't know 1998. I haven't been back, so I'm due to go. She's still got a ton of friends down there that we're in touch with. And I think it'd be fun to go back and see how different it is. Like I said, it became a developer's paradise for tearing down all the charming old structures and bungalows and throwing up condos and developments and hotels. It's kind of hideous in my impression of it is now. And the traffic is horrible, which wasn't like that when I was there. But I just kind of be fun to go back to the ARE and see what's doing, see how things have changed. It's a fun road trip. It's a nice ride down the coast, you know.
Yeah, Virginia Beach has some really nice spots.
Oh, they do.
I'm not exactly sure where this place is, but I've been there like on a family vacation. And I could even say like being with my family for a week, I could still say I had a great time. So it must have been really nice.
No, it's in the best part of town. It's at the north end, which is a little more secluded, and it's just one main drag. You're not in the middle of highways and interchanges. There's the main drag, and it's up on 68th Street, and you have to go down to 34th Street to hit an intersection. So it's still fairly secluded. It was a very nice area to be renting a place. I was really happy there.
That's nice.
And my sister lived there till some years ago. She moved back up here to take care of our parents with me, but she lived there for quite a long time. She knows the beach like the back of her hand. So at some point we'll go back.
One thing I did want to ask, I mean, I guess maybe you might have brought it up earlier, but like, did you ever come across any people there that are like kind of prominent today in anything?
There are a number of writers that my sister knows. I don't know that you would recognize their names. One was Mark Thurston. They're pretty much endemic to that area. I don't know of anybody world famous. My sister would know better than I do.
Okay.
But, being that was a long time ago, probably not. It's the ARE's changed quite a lot, changed hands many times over. But like I said, my sister's in touch with people down there. She would know better than I do.
Very nice. All right, well then I guess we'll wrap it up there if we're all good.
All right.
BD, thank you. That was awesome. That was an amazing story. It was really cool to get like an idea of it was interesting to see your background, to hear part of it. Really wild. You really got to, what's cool is you had a chance to really immerse yourself into something that you had a passion for, That's awesome.
Yeah, like I said, it was my life trajectory started there and just keeps on going from that point, venturing into different areas, but that was the impetus right there. And then that psychic telling me you're going to move. I see the initials VB, you're going to move in 6 months to someplace, and I see initials VB, and she had no way of knowing, and I had no way of knowing. So it was just that was the way it happened, it was just kind of magical.
Yeah, right. That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
We'll go around and let everybody plug themselves. We'll just start with Headless Giant. You go first. Let everybody know where they can find your stuff, please, good sir.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, so you can find me on X at the Headless Giant. You can look up my videos on YouTube. I've got a bunch on there. So, yeah, check me out that way. And every psychic I've ever been to has told me to keep my day job. So
that's funny. Damn. And Jin the Ninja, please let everybody know where they can find your amazing work.
Sure. So I'm on X at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn. I have a show, Threshold Saints, Spotify and Anchor. I just did an episode on the Nice podcast with Monty and Mac on Wicked City. So it's an anime. I didn't get too heavy into occult stuff, but a little bit. It has to come up, right? So I did that. And Tracy Twyman Part 2 will be out tomorrow morning or after this. Maybe I don't know when this will air, but it'll be out tomorrow on Wednesday. So, and then BD's episode 18. Everybody go listen to that. Lana Del Rey, Ocean of Stars. So, yeah, thank you guys. And thanks, Nick. Thanks, Headless. Thanks, BD. And it was amazing.
Thank you.
As always, man. Thank you for joining us, bro. And BD, let everybody know where they can find you on social media or whatever you want to plug. Books, whatever you like.
Sure. Instagram, X. The link tree below will take you to my books on Amazon and my website, strangebutTrueCrime.com, and 2 very neglected YouTube channels that are listed in there. One is Star Sleuth, which is my handle on my social media, and I'm trying to get that going with some of the work I've done on Occult Rejects and some other work I've done. It's very slow going because, there's a lot of other stuff to deal with. But that's where you can find me, one of those places.
Awesome, yes. And I will include the link tree, and I will have, I think that has a bunch of your stuff in there, correct? Even
It's inclusive, yeah.
Awesome. All right, so yeah, everybody's links will be in the bottom anyway, and thank you all very much again, BD. Thank you again for giving us some of, I guess, kind of your personal background story. That's what's up, It was an
thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was a really interesting story. I thought that was pretty cool. And again, Headless and Jin, thank you very much for jumping on. Always a pleasure. And that's the end of another Occult Rejects. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.